Alexander Cavendish did not remember falling. He remembered the sharp crack of branches, the hot sting of air slashing across his face, the violent lurch as his stallion reared beneath him. He remembered the shout, rough, uneducated, too close to his left ear. He remembered the gleam of metal, the sudden shock of pain at his temple, and the dizzying sensation of the world tilting sideways. Then nothing. The ground caught him with brutal indifference. For a long time there was only darkness, dense and muffled, like being submerged deep beneath black water. Voices rose and fell above him, distant as thunder. Sometimes a rough hand seized his shoulder. Sometimes he heard laughter, ugly and triumphant. Once, as if through layers of fog, he felt fingers wrenching the heavy ring from his hand, and a whisper near his ear. "Won't be so grand now, will you, my lord?" He tried to move. His body refused. Heat and cold chased each other through his veins, leaving him shivering and burning in turns. Somewhere far away, a horse screamed. Hooves pounded, then even those sounds receded, leaving only a long, suffocating silence. He drifted. Time dissolved into fragments of sensation. Wet earth against his cheek, the copper tang of blood sliding over his tongue, the distant cry of a night bird. He thought, perhaps, he heard his name once, spoken in a familiar voice, heavy with command. Alexander. He reached toward it, but the darkness had stronger hands. He sank again. When he finally stirred, it was to the scrape of wheels, the creak of wood, and the muted clop of horses somewhere ahead. His head throbbed in savage pulses. His ribs protested when he drew breath. A damp chill seeped through his clothes and into his bones. He tried to open his eyes and found his lashes stuck together, stiff with drying blood. The world arrived in blurs. A grey sky, low and sullen, bare branches, black against the clouded afternoon. The faint outline of a carriage some distance down a winding country road, just beginning to disappear around a bend. He was alone. He was broken, and he could not remember how he had come to lie sprawled in the ditch like refuse tossed aside. His hand fumbled weakly at his side. No ring, no signet, no seal. The left side of his face felt swollen, hot. The familiar weight of his pocket watch was gone as well. He tasted iron and humiliation. Robbed. The realization came with a sharp, lucid clarity that cut through the haze. He had been ambushed. Someone had known his route, his schedule, his habit of traveling with minimal escort on this particular stretch of road. Someone had planned this. He tried to push himself up, and agony ripped through his chest, hot and blinding. The world dimmed again. He fell back, breath hitching, the taste of failure bitter on his tongue. Not like this. He would not die nameless in a ditch with his identity stripped from him like the fine cloth of his coat. He was Alexander Cavendish, Duke of Renford, master of more land than most men ever saw in a lifetime, and he had clawed his way through enough political storms to know that surrender was nothing more than a choice. But choices required strength. He had none. The grey sky folded in on itself. His pulse thundered like distant drums in his ears. Somewhere between one breath and the next, the road fell silent again. The carriage he had glimpsed vanished entirely, or perhaps he had imagined it. Either way, darkness came again, patient and relentless. He did not see the second carriage appear half an hour later, rolling at a sensible pace, neither hurried nor idle. He did not see the young woman seated within, wrapped in a modest but well-made cloak, her gloved hands resting lightly atop a worn leather reticule. He did not see her gaze wandering absently over the winter fields, her mind still lingering on the sound of her younger sister's laughter. He did not see any of it, but Catherine Whitmore saw him. At first, he was nothing more than a dark shape on the side of the road, a lump of shadow where there should have been only muddy grass and brittle weeds. She thought it must be a fallen branch, perhaps a discarded sack. Then the carriage drew closer. Her breath caught. It was a man. "Good heavens," she whispered, straightening so abruptly that her reticule slid to the floor. "James, stop. Stop at once." The coachman's shoulders tensed. He glanced back through the small front window, his ruddy face pale beneath his cap, when his gaze followed the direction of hers. "Best not, milady," he said quickly, half turning on his box. "A man lolling in a ditch like that. No good comes of it. Could be a drunk, could be worse. Or he could be dying," Catherine said, already reaching for the door handle. "Mistress Catherine," James protested, dropping the reins with one hand in his haste to prevent her from flinging herself into danger. Your father would have my hide if I let you out to meddle with the likes of James. Her voice was calm, but there was steel threaded through it. Either you stop this carriage, or I will jump from it while it moves. His eyes widened. You wouldn't. She held his gaze for 3 unflinching seconds. He swore under his breath and hauled on the reins. The horses snorted and slowed, the carriage shuddering to a reluctant halt. The man lay half concealed by the slight rise of the ditch, as if the earth itself tried to reclaim him. His dark hair was matted against his forehead. Blood streaked one side of his face, dried in places, fresh in others. His coat, fine, or it had been once, was torn at the shoulder, the fabric stiff with more blood. His boots were scuffed and caked with mud. He did not move. For a moment Catherine only stared. Something inside her chest tightened, an instinctive, almost painful pull. He looked wrong there, out of place, like a painting torn from a gilded frame and tossed into the gutter. There was something about the angle of his jaw, the set of his shoulders even in unconsciousness, that spoke not of drunken collapse, but of violent interruption. "James," she said softly, "help me." "Miss, no." He scrambled down from his seat, blocking her view with the breadth of his body. "We cannot. He might be a thief, or a murderer, or playing dead to get us close. Your father, my father is not here." Catherine stepped around him with surprising agility, her boots sinking slightly in the damp earth. The cold air bit at her cheeks, turning them a brighter pink beneath her bonnet. "I am. And I will not leave a man to die, because of what he might be." James dragged a hand over his face, torn between exasperation and reluctant respect. "If this ends badly, I'll not forgive myself." "If we leave him," Catherine said, kneeling beside the stranger, "I shall never forgive myself." She leaned closer, the faint scent of iron and damp wool filling her nose. Up close, the brutality of his condition was worse. A jagged wound marred his temple. There were bruises forming along his jaw, his neck, the visible part of his chest where his shirt had been torn open. His lips were pale, his breathing shallow and irregular. "Sir," she whispered, "can you hear me?" For a moment, there was nothing. Then, with painful slowness, his eyelids fluttered. Grey eyes, stormy, unfocused, struggled to fix on her face. She saw confusion there first, then a flicker of something else. Recognition? No. Impossible. They had never met, but it felt strangely, as though he saw her clearly for one heartbeat, as though the world narrowed to the space between them. "Who?" His voice was hoarse, barely sound. The single syllable scraped against his throat. "You are injured," Catherine said, speaking gently as if to a skittish horse. "We are going to help you. Do not try to move yet." His gaze dipped briefly to the road behind her, as if searching for something, or someone, who was no longer there. A muscle in his jaw clenched. "Ambush," he forced out. "Took everything." James made a soft, uneasy sound. "Told you, miss. Robert's men, like as not. Been thick as flies on this road of late." Catherine ignored him. "Are you alone?" she asked the stranger. "Is anyone else hurt?" His eyes closed again, as if the effort of speaking had exhausted him. "Horse," he muttered. "Gone." His hand twitched once against the ground, fingers grasping at invisible reins. "Ring." His voice trailed off. "James," Catherine said, her decision made in an instant. "We are taking him home." James flinched as if struck. "No, absolutely not. Your father will—" "Then tell him I overruled you," she said calmly. "He will believe that. Wrap him in the blanket from the carriage. Carefully. We must not jostle his ribs more than necessary." James stared at her, appalled. "You speak as though you've dragged 6 dying men into Renford Manor for tea." A faint, humourless smile touched her lips. "It is not Renford Manor," she reminded him. "Not any longer. It is only the house on Renford land that my father is barely allowed to keep." Guilt flickered across James's features. He had served the Whitmores long enough to know better than to speak thoughtlessly of their diminished estate. "Begging your pardon, miss, I meant no—" "I know." She glanced back at the stranger, then reached out and very gently brushed muddy hair from his brow. Her gloved fingers lingered for a moment over his skin, searching for warmth. "But whoever he is, he did not choose to bleed on the Duke of Renford's land today." The irony did not escape her. The Duke, a distant, powerful figure in her mind, owned everything as far as the eye could see, from the fences to the hedges to the crumbling cottage roofs. His stewards collected rents. His men enforced rules. He was a name, a weight, an invisible hand on every Whitmore decision. But he was not here now. She was. "Come," she said, rising to her feet. "Help me lift him." It took them both. James grunted with the effort, his boots slipping once in the mud. Catherine swallowed her own discomfort and hooked her hands beneath the stranger's shoulders, ignoring the way his blood stained her gloves. He groaned faintly, his head lolling against her arm. For a moment, she felt the heavy, solid reality of him. Broad shoulders, strong chest, the unmistakable build of a man accustomed to physical vigor, not indolence. Not a drunk, she thought. Not a vagrant. Someone. They maneuvered him into the carriage, laying him along the length of the seat, then propping his head in Catherine's lap to keep his airway open. The blanket, hastily shaken free of crumbs and dust, covered him from chest to boots. He shivered once, a sharp involuntary jerk that she felt through the bones of her thighs. "Drive as smoothly as you can," she told James as she settled herself, one hand steady over the stranger's shoulder. "But quickly." "Yes, miss." The resignation in his voice was thick enough to taste. Still, he obeyed. As the carriage jolted back into motion, Catherine focused on keeping her breathing slow and even. The stranger's weight was considerable, pressing into her, making every bump in the road resonate through their shared contact. She watched the rhythm of his chest beneath the blanket, counting each rise and fall. Too shallow, too slow. "Stay with us," she murmured, bending closer so that her words brushed his ear. "Whoever you are, do not let go yet. The world is ill-mannered enough. It does not need to be rid of you so abruptly." His lips moved. She leaned closer, straining to hear. "Name," he whispered. The faintest ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, cracked and chapped with cold. "Not important." "That is for you to decide," she said softly. "Not for fate, or thieves, or ditches." He made a sound that might have been a laugh, and for one astonishing second his eyes opened again. They were clearer this time, still clouded by pain, but more focused, his gaze searching her face with almost disconcerting intensity. She felt suddenly exposed beneath that scrutiny, though she knew she must look absurd. Bonnet askew, cheeks flushed, cloak rumpled, a perfect stranger's head in her lap. "You are not afraid," he said slowly, as if the observation puzzled him. She tilted her chin. "Should I be?" His lashes lowered, then lifted again. Something like a memory sparked in his gaze. "Men like me," he murmured, "are seldom the safest." The carriage hit a rut. Pain surged through him, visible in the way his jaw clenched, his fingers spasming at his sides. His words broke off into a ragged breath. "Men like you," Catherine said firmly, "are currently in no condition to threaten anyone. Rest. If you faint again, see that you do it neatly. My gown is not meant for bloodstains." To her surprise, a faint, breathless huff escaped his chest. "Commanding," he murmured. "Like a—" His brow furrowed. "Colonel—" "I beg your pardon." "Regiment," he mumbled, his thoughts slipping sideways. "Orders, move the troops, hold the line, Renford, I will not fall." The name skated past her ears like a spark. Renford. Her heart gave a startled leap, then immediately scolded itself for such nonsense. Renford was the name of the duchy, the land, the estate. Men spoke it in taverns and counting-houses and tenant cottages. It did not belong solely to the Duke. Soldiers might have marched under that banner. One of them could easily be lying in her lap now. Still, the word lodged under her skin, an irritant of curiosity. "Renford is not a regiment," she said quietly, unable to stop herself. "It is a place." He did not seem to hear. His eyes had gone unfocused again, roaming the interior of the carriage as if seeing something entirely different. "Meeting at dawn," he whispered. "Letter in red ink. Parliament will not wait. Damn them all, they never—" His words dissolved into incoherent murmurs. The fever, she realized with a pang, was already pulling him down. Catherine bit her lip. Names, places, letters. None of it belonged in the muddled speech of a common highway victim. But she had no time to puzzle over that now. The smell of smoke and damp stone grew stronger, signaling that they were nearing home. Home. Whitmore House, once proud, now weary, sat on a gentle rise overlooking fields that no longer belonged entirely to them. The front drive was lined with bare, skeletal trees. In summer, the leaves tried valiantly to make the approach look grand. In winter, the truth stood exposed. Peeling paint, missing shingles, broken fences mended with rope instead of proper boards. The carriage rolled to a stop before the front steps. The heavy door flew open almost at once, as if the house itself had been holding its breath for Catherine's return. Thomas Whitmore stood in the doorway. Her father had once been a tall man, straight-backed and sharp-eyed, known for his quick wit and quicker laughter. The years had bent him, rounding his shoulders, hollowing his cheeks. Debt-inked lines of worry at the corners of his eyes. The grey in his hair had overtaken the brown, and his clothes, though clean, showed signs of careful mending. He squinted at the carriage, then at his daughter emerging from it. "You're late," he said gruffly, though relief softened his tone. "I was beginning to imagine every mishap from broken axles to runaway horses. Did your sister make you stay to hear every detail of her newest domestic triumph?" "She did discuss her curtains at length," Catherine admitted, stepping aside as James moved to open the other door. "But that is not why I am late." "Then what in blazes—" His question snapped in half when he saw James struggling to maneuver a limp, blanket-wrapped body from the carriage. Thomas's face drained of colour. "What?" he said very quietly. "Is that—" "A man," Catherine said, her chin lifting defensively. "I can see that it is a man," he snapped, suddenly sounding more like the father she remembered from her childhood. "The question, Catherine, is why a man is being carried into my house like a sack of flour." "He was lying in the ditch by the south bend," she explained, hurrying alongside James to steady the stranger's shoulders. "Unconscious, bleeding. We could not leave him there to die. Could not—" Thomas's hand clenched into a fist at his side. "Good God, have you lost your mind? Do you know nothing of the world? He could be a thief, a deserter, a cutthroat. He is a man," she repeated, carefully enunciating each word, "and he is gravely injured. If you wish to scold me, you may do so after he no longer hovers between life and death." Their gazes collided. For a heartbeat, father and daughter seemed to stand on a knife edge, balanced between argument and understanding. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. "Bring him inside," he muttered. "The servants will talk for a week, but better that than the coroner knocking at my door." James mined his head on the lintel. "Catherine, you are not to lift anything. If you strain your back over a stranger, I shall disown you." "You always say that," she said, the smallest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "And you never do. Do not tempt me." They carried the stranger into the hall, where the chill of the outside air lingered despite the meagre fire crackling in the hearth. The housekeeper, Mrs. Crowthorne, appeared as if conjured by the scent of trouble, her expression an all-too-familiar blend of disapproval and concern. "Oh, Miss Catherine," she clucked, pressing a hand to her ample bosom, "what have you dragged home this time?" "Not a stray cat. You will be relieved to know," Catherine said wryly. "A man. Perhaps we might upgrade your complaints accordingly." "A man," Mrs. Crowthorne repeated faintly, setting her jaw. "Of course, why would it ever be something simple like a misplaced cradle or a broken vase? No, it must be bleeding men in the front hall." "Spare me your theatrics, Crowthorne," Thomas said. "We have enough of those under this roof already. Take him to the blue room." "The blue room?" Mrs. Crowthorne sniffed. "The blue room is for guests. Guests do not generally bleed on my carpets," he retorted. "Nevertheless, it is the only chamber with a bed not threatening to collapse under the weight of a feather." "The bed in the blue room squeaks," she muttered. "Then the stranger will have something to distract him from his injuries." Despite her protests, Mrs. Crowthorne led the way upstairs, her brisk footsteps echoing down the corridor. James and Thomas carried the unconscious man between them, Catherine hovering close, ready to assist if his arms or legs slipped awkwardly. The blue room looked particularly forlorn in winter. Faded wallpaper, once patterned with delicate flowers, peeled slightly at the edges. A draught whispered treacherously around the window frame. The bed, however, was sturdy and clean, the sheets smelling faintly of lavender. They lowered the stranger onto the mattress. He groaned, his head rolling to one side, exposing the full ugly extent of the wound on his temple. Mrs. Crowthorne inhaled sharply. "He'll need hot water, and bandages, and laudanum, if we've any left." "We have some," Catherine said. "I will fetch it." "No, you will stay here," the housekeeper said firmly. "You found him, you'll fuss over him if I let you out of my sight. Sit down before you fall down. You're pale as milk." "She is fine," Thomas interjected. "But the laudanum—" "Under my bed," Mrs. Crowthorne said briskly. "In the box I told you never to touch." "You told me never to touch half the things in this house, because you break the other half." Catherine pressed her lips together to keep a laugh from escaping. The absurdity of the situation, the bleeding stranger, the argument about squeaking beds and broken trinkets, warred with the stark fear knotting her stomach. What if he died here? What if he died under their roof, in their care, with no name and no one to claim him? What if she had brought not just a man, but a tragedy into their fragile, threadbare world? She moved to the bedside, ignoring Mrs. Crowthorne's protests, and gently took the stranger's hand. It was cold, the veins beneath his skin standing out faintly. She rubbed her thumb over his knuckles, trying to coax warmth back into them. "Do not dare," she whispered, leaning close. "Do not dare die here and leave me forever wondering who you were." His eyelids fluttered again. For a moment his fingers tightened around hers with surprising strength. "Alexander," he breathed. Her heart stuttered. "Alexander," she repeated, the name settling on her tongue like something fragile and valuable. "Is that your name?" He did not answer. The brief flare of consciousness flickered out. His grip slackened, his hand sliding back into stillness. "Alexander," she whispered again, quietly committing it to memory. "Very well, Alexander, you are not leaving us yet. I refuse to permit it." The fever arrived with the night. It crept into the room as the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the fragile winter sky with streaks of muted pink and grey. The house fell into its usual evening rhythm, the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the murmur of voices in the servants' quarters, the uneven tread of Thomas pacing in his study. In the blue room the air grew thick with the scent of sweat and herbs. Catherine sat in a chair by the bed, her cloak discarded, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. A basin of cool water rested on the table beside her, along with a stack of clean cloths, a jar of salve, and the small precious bottle of laudanum. The candlelight flickered over the stranger's face, casting sharp shadows along his cheekbones and jaw. His features were strong, refined even in distress. A straight nose, a firm mouth, a brow that furrowed when pain twisted through him. The bruises could not entirely obscure the hint of something aristocratic in the line of his cheek, the shape of his hand, the way he seemed to occupy space even unconsciously. His fever burned steadily higher. "Lord save us," Mrs. Crowthorne muttered each time she came to check on them. "He's cooking like a Christmas goose." "He will not be served on a platter," Catherine said, wringing out another cloth and laying it carefully across his forehead. His skin hissed almost audibly under the cool touch. "We are bringing the heat down, slowly." "If he lives through the night, it will be a miracle," the housekeeper said, softening despite herself. "You should sleep, Miss Catherine. Your eyes look like bruises themselves." "I am not tired," Catherine lied. Mrs. Crowthorne snorted. "And I am not old." Both statements are equally false. She studied the young woman for a long, considering moment. "I'll send up some broth, and a roll. If you're determined to sit vigil, you'll do it with strength in your bones." "Thank you." When she left, the room felt even quieter. The stranger tossed restlessly, his breath coming in uneven gasps. The sheets twisted around his legs. Once his hand shot out, fingers clawing at the air, as if reaching for something just out of sight. "No," he rasped. "Get back. Hold the line, for God's sake, man, that's an order." Catherine caught his hand and held it firmly, her other palm pressing gently against his shoulder. "You are safe," she said, her voice steady. "There is no battle here." His gaze snapped to her, wild and confused. For a second she thought he truly saw her. Then his eyes slid past, focusing instead on ghosts that only he could see. "Mother," he whispered. Then, with a sudden twist of anguish, "William." The name landed between them like a stone. Catherine had no idea who William was, brother, friend, comrade, but something in the stranger's voice made her throat ache. He spoke, off and on, for hours. Names tumbled from his fevered lips. Places, orders, fragments of discussions with men she had never heard of, about policies she did not fully understand. Parliament, the House of Lords, Late-night meetings near the river, votes, debts, scandals. More than once in the midst of delirium he said Renford again. "You will not take Renford," he snarled at one point, his hand tightening around hers with enough force to leave marks. "Not while I draw breath." Catherine steadied him, murmuring nonsense words, the kind one used for frightened children and wounded animals. Her mind churned furiously, piecing together what she could. Alexander, Renford, orders, Parliament, houses, debts. Her heart dared to form a dangerous idea. No, impossible. The Duke of Renford did not lie feverish in her family's old guest room, stripped of his ring and dignity, muttering secrets to a woman he had never met. The Duke was a distant figure in London, surrounded by polished floors and polished people. In any story she had ever heard, dukes did not end up in ditches. But then stories did not always report the whole of reality, especially stories told by those who feared those in power. She shook her head once sharply, as if to dislodge the thought. It was absurd, dangerous even to entertain. Better to consider him a soldier or a steward or a clerk. That was a manageable kind of mystery. And yet, each time his voice steadied, even briefly, the authority in it was unmistakable. It was the tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed, not just by servants or clerks, but by other men of consequence. "Who are you, Alexander?" she murmured, tracing an idle pattern on the back of his hand with her thumb. "And why do you sound like someone the world listens to?" He did not answer. The fever kept its hold. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window pane. An owl called from a distant tree. Somewhere in the house a door creaked as someone moved quietly through the corridor. Hours blurred. She must have dozed, because she jolted awake at the sudden feeling of being watched. The candle had burned low, wax pooling in a misshapen island at its base. The room smelled of stale sweat and drying herbs. The bed was quiet. Alexander lay still, his breathing more even, though his skin still flushed with lingering heat. His hair, damp with perspiration, clung to his forehead. The dressing on his temple needed changing. But for the first time since she had found him, he did not look as though the next breath might be his last. Catherine exhaled slowly, tension draining from her shoulders. Her own neck ached from hours spent in the same position. She shifted slightly in the chair, wincing at the pins and needles shooting down her legs. "Of course," came a dry voice from the doorway. "You would find a way to turn a quiet evening into an epic." Thomas leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. The lines around his eyes had deepened, shadows bruising the skin beneath. He tried for a light tone, but his gaze flicked anxiously to the man in the bed. "How is he?" he asked, and there it was, the worry he had tried to hide. "Better for the moment," Catherine said. "The fever has dropped slightly. He is less restless." "Less prone to shouting battlefield orders, you mean?" her father said. "Crowthorne tells me he has been running entire campaigns from that mattress." "He is not in his right mind," she said quietly. "Men say strange things when fever grips them." "Strange things like the names of members of Parliament?" Thomas asked, raising a brow. "Because that is one of the tidbits that floated to the servants' ears, along with something about a vote in the Lords that would ruin the country's spine, whatever that means." Catherine opened her mouth, then closed it. "We should not listen to the ravings of a delirious man as if they are coherent thoughts," she said finally. Thomas studied his daughter, then the stranger, then his daughter again. "Tell me, my girl, do you honestly believe that a common labourer, or even a common soldier, would speak in his ravings of the Lord Chancellor, the Corn Laws, and Renford in the same breath?" She hesitated. "No?" "No," he echoed softly. He stepped closer to the bed, peering down at the man's face with a grudging curiosity. "That is a gentleman's face, whether we like it or not, and not a minor one. Look at the set of his nose, the way he does not slouch even in unconsciousness. That is aristocracy bred into the bones." "Then he will have a family who misses him," Catherine said. "People who will be looking for him." "Or people who put him in that ditch," Thomas muttered. She glanced sharply at him. I think, he said, that men of power do not arrive broken on our doorstep without a reason, and those reasons are rarely kind ones." He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "We should send word to the magistrate, or to Renford Manor." At the mention of the estate, something prickled at the base of Catherine's neck. "To do what?" she asked, Announce that we found an unconscious man and speculate about his importance based on the shape of his nose. We have no proof of anything, Father, not even his surname. Thomas sighed. You always were cursed with sense at the most inconvenient times. Then let us use it now, she said. We will wait until he wakes and asks questions. When his mind is clear, we can decide what to do next. Until then, we only risk making ourselves look foolish, or worse, making him vulnerable if someone dangerous truly did this to him. She had appealed to his caution, his pride, and his lingering sense of chivalry all at once. Thomas groaned quietly, as if physically pained by being persuaded. Very well, he said at last. We wait. But if he is some sort of... He waved a vague hand. Conspirator, or traitor, or debtor hiding from his obligations, or... We will deal with that when we come to it, Catherine interrupted gently. For now he is simply a man who owes his life to our stubbornness. Thomas's mouth twitched. Your stubbornness, you mean? I was inclined to leave him to his fate, you recall. She remembered all too well the flare of anger that had flashed across his face when she had first described what she intended to do. He had shouted. She had shouted back. James had shifted from foot to foot, looking as if he wished very much to be anywhere else. The argument had ended only because there had been more pressing concerns, like bandaging a gaping wound. If he lives, Thomas said slowly, do you know what he will owe you? A debt? She said lightly. I am not so poetic as to call it a life. A debt of honour, he said, ignoring her attempt at levity. And men who mutter about Parliament and Renford do not settle debts of honour lightly. She thought of their muddled finances, of the long humiliating interviews with stewards sent from Renford Manor, of the threats, delicately veiled, about arrears and evictions, of the way Thomas's shoulders curled more with each passing year. A debt of honour is not a coin one can spend, she said quietly. No, he agreed, but it is a shield sometimes, and God knows we could use one. Catherine said nothing. They lapsed into silence, the only sound the steady tick of the clock on the mantel and the stranger's softer, more even breathing. The candle guttered, then flared again, stubbornly clinging to light. You should sleep, Thomas said eventually, his voice gentler. Crowthorne has made up the small room next to this one for you. If anything changes, she will come flying in here like a hawk after a field mouse. I will stay a little longer, Catherine said, just until I am certain the fever is truly easing. He studied her for a moment, then shook his head fondly. You are your mother's daughter, he murmured. She once nursed a boy from the village for 3 nights straight when he had scarlet fever. Wouldn't leave his side until the rash faded. Stubborn women, the both of you. She smiled, aching at the mention of her mother, but grateful for it nonetheless. Then you should be accustomed to this. Oh, I am, he said. That does not mean I worry less. He leaned down and pressed a brief kiss to the top of her head, a gesture so quick and unexpected that it startled her. Do not give your heart to a mystery, my girl. They are rarely worth the cost. I am not giving my heart to anyone, she said, heat rising to her cheeks for reasons she did not entirely understand. I am merely giving my time, and my bandages, and perhaps a spoonful of laudanum. See that it stays that way, he said. Good night. When he left, the room felt larger, the shadows deeper. Catherine sat quietly for a long time listening to the stranger breathe. Somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, she realized that fate had not simply brushed past them on the road that afternoon. It had climbed into her carriage, settled itself in the blue room and fallen into fever dreams under her watch. The question was not whether this would change anything. The question was how much. Morning came slowly, grey light seeping around the edges of the curtains. Birds began to chatter in the leafless branches outside. Somewhere downstairs, pots clanged, and the smell of porridge drifted faintly upward. Catherine woke with a stiff neck and a blanket she did not remember pulling over herself. Mrs. Crowthorne's handiwork, no doubt. For a moment she did not move. She listened. The breathing in the bed beside her was steady, not ragged, not gasping. Steady. She rose immediately, the fatigue in her limbs forgotten, and crossed to the window to pull the curtains aside just enough to let more light in. The pale morning glow spilled over the man's face. The fever sheen had dulled. His skin, though still flushed, no longer radiated alarming heat. His lips had regained a hint of colour. His brow was smooth, not furrowed. He lay on his back, one arm resting loosely at his side, the other draped across his abdomen. Catherine let out a slow, relieved breath. "You are not done vexing me yet, then," she murmured. "Very well. I suppose I can endure your continued presence." She set about her tasks with brisk efficiency. The bandage on his temple needed changing. She did so carefully, wincing in sympathy at the sight of the raw, healing wound beneath. She cleaned it, applied fresh salve, and wrapped it again with clean linen. When she finished, she checked the time. Nearly 8. Mrs. Crowthorne would be up soon to pester her about eating. Her father would be pretending to read the paper, while actually wondering what was happening upstairs. The servants would be whispering in corners, inventing increasingly dramatic tales about the mysterious man in the blue room. She ought to go down, if only briefly, to reassure everyone that their household guest had not expired in the night. She was just turning toward the door when a low voice halted her. "You," he said. She froze. Slowly she turned back. He was awake. Not half-aware, not fever-muddled. Awake. His eyes, clear and piercing, a striking grey that seemed almost silver in the morning light, were fixed on her with unnerving intensity. There was still a hint of weakness in the way his fingers flexed against the sheet, but his gaze was sharp, assessing. "Good morning," she said, somehow managing a composure she did not feel. "You gave us something of a fright." He studied her for several seconds, his expression unreadable. "Where am I?" "In my father's house," she said. "On Renford land. You were found injured on the road yesterday. My coachman and I brought you here." His jaw tightened at the word Renford. "The South Bend," he said slowly. "A carriage passed me as I lay there. I thought—" He shook his head once. "I was not certain whether I imagined it." "You did not," she said. "That was us." "And you stopped," he said. Not a question, an observation. "Yes. Against your coachman's advice," he added, a faint thread of something, amusement, in his tone. "And I suspect against your father's wishes." She lifted a shoulder. "My father was not present. The coachman voiced his concerns, but ultimately the decision was mine." He blinked. "You took an unknown man into your carriage. You brought him into your home. You nursed him through the night, all without knowing his name." "I know your name," she said quietly. "You told me. Alexander." Something flickered in his gaze, wariness, then resignation. "I did not intend to," he said. "You were not at the time in control of your intentions," she replied. "You were feverish. You spoke of many things." His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "What else did I say?" She considered him for a moment. His voice had the calm, measured cadence of a man who knew how to wield it as both weapon and shield. Even lying in a borrowed bed with bandages around his head, he radiated a certain command. It made her all the more determined not to let him intimidate her in her own house. "Enough to know that you are a man accustomed to being obeyed," she said. "Enough to suspect that you are not a simple farmer or soldier." His mouth quirked at one corner. "And does that make you regret helping me?" She met his gaze without flinching. "If you had been a simple farmer, your life would be no less valuable. I would have helped you regardless." Surprise flickered briefly across his features, quickly replaced by something more guarded. He shifted slightly, then winced, a hand flying instinctively to his ribs. "Careful," she said. "You likely have bruising, perhaps a cracked rib. The doctor would have been useful, but he is 2 villages away and considers a sprained wrist to be a life-threatening emergency. We decided to spare you his dramatics." He stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was not a full, deep laugh. His injuries would not allow it, but a rough, surprised sound that altered his face entirely. The severity softened, revealing a hint of what he might look like, unburdened by pain or responsibility. "You have a talent for irreverence, miss." He paused, brows lifting in question. "Catherine Whitmore," she supplied. "Daughter of Thomas Whitmore, resident troublemaker." "Miss Whitmore," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "Then allow me to thank you properly. You have, by all appearances, saved my life." She felt an unexpected flush creep up her neck. "You are not yet fully recovered. Save your declarations of gratitude until you are no longer confined to bed. Many things seem more dramatic when viewed from a horizontal position, he smiled faintly. And are you always this unwilling to accept thanks? Yes. Why? Because words are cheap, she said simply. If you truly wish to repay a debt, you do it with actions. And I do not rescue men in ditches for the sake of what they might do for me later. He studied her again, his gaze searching her face for something. Approval? Judgment? She could not tell. Nevertheless, he said slowly, a man should know to whom he owes his life, and he should tell her his full name, if only so that she may curse it properly if he ever proves himself unworthy. Her heart gave a curious little leap. There it was again, honor, debt, the weight of things spoken in seriousness. She inclined her head. That seems reasonable. He drew in a breath, winced once more as it pulled at his ribs, and then pushed through the discomfort as if sheer will could override pain. My name, he said, is Alexander Cavendish. The name meant nothing to her, but the next did. Duke of Renford. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Silence fell, heavy and dense. The wind outside rattled the window again, as if reacting to the revelation. Catherine stood very still, her hand resting lightly on the footboard, her fingers suddenly numb. Of all the possibilities she had entertained, soldier, steward, minor lord, this had hovered at the edge of her imagination like a wild, forbidden thought she had not dared give shape to. And now here it was, shaped, solid, undeniable. The Duke of Renford lay in the blue guest room of her father's struggling house, his head having rested in her lap, his fever secrets spilled in her hearing. Her father's landlord, the man whose name stamped every rent notice, the man whose decisions reached into every corner of their lives, the man she had, more than once in the privacy of her own room, sworn at under her breath for the constriction of their circumstances. Her stomach tightened. He watched her carefully, no doubt accustomed to a variety of reactions when he spoke those words. Awe, deference, greed, fear. Catherine offered him none of those readily, but she could not pretend indifference. The Duke of Renford, she said quietly, on Renford land in a Whitmore guest bed. Yes, he said, a wry twist to his mouth. I appreciate the irony as keenly as you do. Her mind raced ahead, imagining her father's reaction when he learned the full truth, the servants' whispers, the village gossip, the potential danger, the potential opportunity. Does anyone know, she asked, that you are here, that you are... you? His gaze darkened. The men who left me in that ditch know, he said. Or rather, they knew who I was when they stripped me of my ring. Whether they left me for dead believing no one would find me, or hoping someone particular would, I cannot yet say. And beyond them, she pressed, my household in London will know that I did not return when expected, he said. Renford Manor likely believes me in town. The distance between here and there is sometimes as wide as the ocean. News travels slowly. Then we are, for the moment, she said slowly, your only witnesses, your only keepers. Something flickered in his expression at that word. So it seems. She let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Then, Your Grace, you may rest easy. Your secret is safe. For now. He tilted his head slightly, wincing again at the movement. You are remarkably calm. Would you prefer I faint? She asked, lifting a brow. I can attempt it, but I suspect I would only fall awkwardly and bruise my elbow. A huff of laughter escaped him. No, please do not. I have had quite enough drama for 1 week. Her lips curled despite herself. You are not what I expected, Your Grace. I might say the same, he replied. I do not often find myself indebted to young women who argue with me about the value of their own benevolence. Then perhaps you should fall into ditches more often, she said dryly. It might broaden your experience. His eyes gleamed. You would not wish that. You have already demonstrated how much work it is to drag me out of one. She bit back a smile, annoyed at how easily he could draw out her humor even now. You are impertinent for a man who nearly died on my upholstery, and you are bold for a woman who has just discovered that she spent the night watching over a duke, he countered. Her cheeks warmed, but she lifted her chin. Titles are useful in practical matters, she said evenly. They do not impress me much beyond that. He sobered, his gaze sharpening. "Then what does impress you, Miss Whitmore?" She opened her mouth to answer, and realized she did not have a ready response. What did impress her? Not wealth, certainly. She had seen what wealth without compassion did to men. Not titles, not lineage, not charm. Character, she thought. Courage. The willingness to do what is right when it is inconvenient or costly. Actions, she said finally. The choices a person makes when no one is watching. How they treat those who can do nothing for them. Something in his expression changed, tightening, as if her words struck too close to a place he kept guarded. "Then," he said quietly, "you misjudged me when you brought me here. I can do much for you, Miss Whitmore, for your father, for this house, if I so choose." She held his gaze. "Then we will see," she said. "Won't we?" The door flew open then, sparing him the need to respond immediately. "Miss Catherine, your porridge is getting cold and I refuse to watch you wither away like a neglected—" Mrs. Crowthorne's voice cut off mid-scold when she saw the Duke sitting partially upright, his eyes open. "Oh, well, that's a complication, isn't it?" Alexander's brows drew together, as if perplexed by her lack of deference. "I beg your pardon." "You will, once you've tasted my broth," she said briskly. "Your Grace." The honorific landed slightly late, as if she had only just decided to attach it. "Miss Catherine, out. You will eat something while the Duke pretends not to be in pain." "I am not," he began. "You are in pain," she said briskly. "If you were not, you would be a corpse. Only corpses are entirely comfortable after such a beating. You will not move. You will not attempt to stand. You will sip this slowly and pretend it tastes delightful." She thrust a steaming cup toward him. He stared at her, then at the cup, then back at her. "Does everyone in this house issue commands as if they expect to be obeyed?" he asked. "Yes," Catherine and Mrs. Crowthorne said in unison. He blinked. Then, to Catherine's astonishment, he took the cup. She slipped out of the room while the housekeeper bustled in, her mind whirling. The Duke was awake, conscious, aware of who he was and where he lay, and he had already begun to test the edges of the invisible lines that shaped their small, precarious world. Below stairs, the house hummed with the usual sounds of morning. Her father sat at the scarred dining table with a piece of toast and a cup of tea that had gone cold. The newspaper lay open in front of him, but his eyes were distant. "He is awake," Catherine said, sliding into the chair opposite him. Thomas blinked, returning from whatever gloomy corner of his thoughts he had occupied. And he remembers his name." She took a breath. "Alexander Cavendish." Her father frowned. "That sounds familiar." "It should," she said softly. "He is the Duke of Renford." The expression that crossed Thomas Whitmore's face was not one Catherine would soon forget. Shock, fear, fury, and beneath all of it, a deep, bone-deep weariness. "The Duke," he said, as if the word itself offended him. "In my house." "In your guest bed," she said, "bleeding on your sheets, drinking Mrs. Crowthorne's broth." He stared at her. "Did he say anything about—" He gestured vaguely around them. "Money? Debts? Evictions? Did he threaten to throw us into the snow the moment he could walk?" "No," she said, "though Mrs. Crowthorne has not yet invented a broth hearty enough to support such a declaration." "This is not amusing," he snapped, then immediately seemed to regret his tone. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Of all the men in all the ditches in all of England, you had to drag home the one who holds our future like a noose in his hands." Catherine folded her hands in her lap. "He does not seem eager to tighten that noose," she said carefully. "If anything, he seems grateful, and more unsettled by his vulnerability than by our presence." "He is a duke," Thomas said. "Of course he is unsettled. Men like him are not accustomed to owing anything to anyone, least of all to a family they have been grinding slowly into dust." Her heart squeezed. "We do not know that he personally—" "His name is on the papers," her father said harshly. "His seal on the notices, his stewards knocking at our door. Whether he signed each document with his own hand or delegated the task to some underling, the power is his. He cannot pretend innocence." "He did not," she said quietly. "Pretend innocence, that is. Not yet. He knows he owes us something. He called it a debt of honor even before he revealed his title." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "A debt of honor," he repeated. Those are fine words from a man who has never wondered how to pay his servants at the end of the month. Perhaps, she said, choosing each word carefully, we might see what he does before we decide what he will not do. Her father was silent for a long moment. When your mother died, he said at last, his voice rough, I promised myself I would not gamble with what remained of this family. I have already lost too much. Reputation, property, peace of mind. He looked at her, his gaze raw. I will not bet your future on the conscience of a duke. You are not betting anything, she said softly. The die is already cast. He is here. He knows who we are. He knows what we did. Whatever comes next, we cannot pretend it away. We can only meet it. He closed his eyes briefly. You sound like her, he whispered. She reached for his hand. Then perhaps we will survive this, as we survived everything else. He squeezed her fingers once, then let go. Go back to him, he said. Watch him. Talk to him. Learn what you can before the world comes pounding at our door. Because it will, Catherine. Men like him do not disappear quietly. She rose, her heart heavy and strangely light all at once. I will. As she climbed the stairs, Catherine felt the threads of her life tighten and shift. Yesterday, the Duke of Renford had been nothing more than a name on paper, a shadow in faraway rooms where decisions were made without her input. Today, he was a man in her guest room, drinking her housekeeper's terrible broth and sparring with her over the nature of gratitude. Tomorrow was a mystery. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something unfamiliar stir beneath the constant press of worry and responsibility. Anticipation. The road that had always stretched predictable and narrow before her now forked in a direction she had never imagined. She had reached down into the ditch and pulled up not just a man but a story with the power to unravel and rewrite the threads of her world. And she could not, for the life of her, look away. By the third day, Alexander Cavendish had become an unwelcome fixture in the rhythms of Whitmore House. Unwelcome not because he was unpleasant, but because his presence changed everything. Servants whispered in corners. Mrs. Crowthorne grumbled louder than usual, which Catherine recognized as concern wrapped in complaint. Thomas paced his study, muttering calculations that had nothing to do with crop yields and everything to do with dukes and debts, and the impossible tangle of gratitude and resentment. And Catherine found herself spending far too much time in the blue room, telling herself it was duty when it felt dangerously like something else. Alexander recovered with the stubborn determination of a man unaccustomed to being told what his body could not do. On the morning of the third day, she found him attempting to stand without assistance, one hand gripping the bedpost, jaw clenched against the pain radiating through his ribs. Sit down before you fall down, she said from the doorway. He glanced at her, a flash of irritation quickly suppressed. I have spent enough time horizontal to last a lifetime. Then spend a few more days ensuring you do not spend the rest of it that way permanently, she retorted, crossing to his side. Your ribs are bruised, possibly cracked. Standing will not heal them faster. It will only give Mrs. Crowthorne an excuse to say, I told you so when you collapse. She already says that hourly, he muttered, but he allowed Catherine to guide him back to the chair by the window. He settled into it with poorly concealed relief, breath coming shorter than he wished. You are a terrible patient, Catherine observed. I am an impatient patient, he corrected. There is a difference. Not to those who must endure you. His mouth twitched despite himself. You have a gift for deflating a man's dignity, Miss Whitmore. Your dignity survived being dragged unconscious from a ditch, she said. I suspect it can survive a few pointed observations. He studied her, the morning light catching the grey of his eyes and turning them almost silver. You do not speak to me as others do, he said quietly. Should I curtsy more? She asked, deliberately misunderstanding. No. His gaze held hers. I mean, you speak to me as though my title is incidental, as though the man matters more than the rank. She considered that. The rank did not bleed on my upholstery, she said finally. The man did. I am more concerned with the latter. Something shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps, or recognition. My mother would have liked you, he said. Would she? She believed that character outweighed title, he said. A philosophy that made her deeply unpopular in certain circles and deeply beloved in others. She insisted I walk the tenant farms, know their names, see which children had boots for winter. My father thought her sentimental. I thought her inconvenient. And now? Catherine asked softly. Now she is the voice in my head every time I sign an order that affects lives I will never see, he said. I do not always live up to her standards, but I hear her disappointment when I fail. Catherine sank into the chair opposite him. That is a heavy ghost to carry. Better than carrying nothing at all, he replied. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the winter sun pale against the floorboards. Your Grace, she said eventually, why were you on that road alone? Surely a duke does not travel without guards, without the pageantry expected of my station, he finished. No, but I was meant to meet someone quietly. A minister who prefers his conversations unrecorded. We had business regarding grain tariffs and trade restrictions, matters that make powerful men unhappy when altered. And someone new, she said, understanding dawning. Yes. His jaw tightened. Someone knew my route, my timing. They took my ring, my papers, my horse, left me for dead, or close enough. But they did not kill you outright, she said. Why? That, he said, is the question that keeps me awake. A dead duke creates investigations, inquiries, consequences. A missing duke creates confusion, and confusion can be useful if one wishes to act in his name without his interference. Catherine's stomach tightened. Someone could be impersonating you. With my ring and seal? Easily. His hands curled into fists. Every day I lie here, someone may be giving orders, signing papers, ruining lives in my name, and I am powerless to stop it. She saw the frustration coiled in every line of him, the leashed fury of a man accustomed to control now stripped of it. You are not powerless, she said. You are healing. There is a difference. Tell that to the tenants who may be evicted while I convalesce, he said bitterly. Tell it to yourself, she countered. You are no use to anyone dead. Recover first, then act. He looked at her, and slowly, some of the tension eased. You are relentless. I am practical, she corrected. Someone in this room must be. A knock interrupted them. Thomas entered, his expression tense. We have visitors, he said. 3 men, Renford livery. Alexander straightened immediately, ignoring the sharp protest of his ribs. Markham, he said. It must be. Who? Catherine asked. Colonel James Markham, my steward, former military. If anyone would track me down, it would be him. Thomas hesitated. Should we? Bring him up, Alexander said. If it is Markham, he is trustworthy. If it is not, we will know soon enough. Minutes later, a broad-shouldered man with iron-grey hair and a soldier's bearing entered the blue room. His sharp blue eyes swept over Alexander, and relief cracked his stern features. Your Grace, he said, voice rough, I expected to find you dead. I am delighted to disappoint you, Colonel, Alexander replied dryly. Markham's gaze flicked to Catherine, then Thomas, assessing. You brought him here. Yes, Catherine said simply. For you saved his life. That remains to be seen, she said. He is still recovering. Markham's mouth almost smiled. Miss Whitmore, I presume. His Grace owes you a debt. So he keeps saying, she replied. I am beginning to think dukes enjoy being indebted. It gives them an excuse to make grand gestures. This time Markham did smile, brief and genuine. Then he sobered, turning back to Alexander. We have trouble. A man wearing your ring appeared at Renford Manor yesterday, demanding access to funds. I refused until he could prove his identity properly. He fled. Alexander's expression darkened. Description? Stocky, rough accent, though he tried to hide it. The stable boy he bribed said he smelled of the docks. A hired man, then, Alexander said. Not someone from my circle, which means whoever orchestrated this wanted distance between themselves and the deed. We have another problem, Markham said grimly. 3 riders arrived in the village this morning asking questions about strangers on the road. They are not mine. Catherine's pulse quickened. You think they are looking for him? I think they are looking for answers, Markham said. Whether those answers lead them here depends on how loudly the household has spoken. We have been discreet, Thomas said stiffly. Discretion, Markham replied, is a relative term when a duke lies wounded under your roof. Enough, Alexander interrupted. "Markham, post men around the property, quietly. If these riders come here, I want to know their purpose before they reach the door. You are not well enough to—" "I am well enough to think," Alexander said, "and well enough to stand if I must. Do not coddle me, Colonel. We do not have that luxury." Markham's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "As you say, Your Grace." He left. Catherine exhaled slowly. "This is becoming dangerous." "It was always dangerous," Alexander said. "You simply did not know it yet." She met his gaze. "And now that I do?" "Now," he said quietly, "you must decide whether you regret pulling me from that ditch." She considered him, this man who had brought complexity and peril into her simple, struggling world, this man who spoke of debts and honor and ghosts. "No," she said finally. "I do not regret it. But I do not know what comes next." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But whatever it is, I will not let it fall on you. You have my word." "Words," she said, echoing something she had told him days before, "are cheap." "Then watch my actions," he replied, "and judge me accordingly." The riders came that afternoon, 3 men, rough-looking, their eyes too sharp, their hands too ready near their belts. Markham met them at the door with a soldier's calm indifference, answering their questions about strangers on the road with carefully constructed ignorance. Catherine watched from the upstairs window, Alexander beside her, despite her protests. "Do you recognize them?" she whispered. "No," he said, "but that means little. Hired men leave no trail to their employers." One of the riders glanced upward, his gaze sweeping the windows. For a heartbeat, Catherine thought he saw them. Then Markham said something, drawing attention back. The conversation grew tense. One rider gestured sharply. Markham's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, his weight balanced, ready. Then, abruptly, the riders mounted and left. Catherine exhaled. "They will be back," Alexander said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because they are not convinced," he said, "and unconvinced men do not stop asking questions." That night, as the household settled into uneasy quiet, Alexander made his decision. "I leave for Renford Manor tomorrow," he told Catherine when she brought him tea. "Markham is right. I am putting you in danger by remaining." "You are not well enough," she protested. "I am well enough to sit a carriage," he said, "and I cannot stay here, drawing threats to your door." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist he stay until fully healed, but she knew he was right. "Very well," she said quietly. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and deliberate. "Before I go, there is something you must know." She waited, pulse quickening. "Your father's debts," he said. "They are cleared. The land is yours, free and clear. I've already sent the orders." She stared. "You cannot—" "I can," he said, "and I have. It is not charity, Catherine. It is payment for a debt of honor. You saved my life. I am returning a measure of yours." Tears prickled her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "That is too much." "It is not nearly enough," he said softly. "But it is a beginning." "A beginning of what?" she whispered. He held her gaze, something fierce and vulnerable flickering there. "I do not know yet, but I would like to find out, if you are willing." Her breath caught. "You are a duke. I am—" "You are the woman who saw a stranger bleeding in a ditch and chose compassion over caution," he said. "You are clever, brave, and entirely too good at deflating my pride. You are, in short, the most interesting person I have met in years." "That," she said unsteadily, "is a dangerous thing to say to someone you have known less than a week." "Then let me know you longer," he said. "Come to London, as my guest. Let me show you that not all of my world is insufferable. And if I find it entirely insufferable," he smiled, "then I will know I chose wisely, because only someone worth listening to would tell me so." She looked at him, this man who had arrived broken and left her world irrevocably changed. "I will think about it," she said. "That," he replied, "is more than I hoped for." The next morning, Alexander Cavendish, Duke of Renford, left Whitmore House in a well-sprung carriage, Markham riding alongside, guards discreetly positioned. Catherine watched from the doorway as he paused before entering the carriage, turning back to meet her eyes one last time. He did not wave, did not call out. He simply looked at her as though memorizing her face. Then he was gone. The house felt impossibly empty. Thomas found her still standing there an hour later. "He will come back," her father said quietly. "You do not know that." "I know men," Thomas said, "and that man is not finished with you." 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. It was written in a bold, precise hand on heavy paper, embossed with the Renford seal. "Miss Whitmore, I have thought of little else but our conversation. London still waits. So do I. Yours in gratitude and hope." Alexander Catherine read it 3 times. Then she sat down and began to write her reply. The world, she thought, was about to become far more complicated, and for the first time in years, she welcomed it. London arrived in Catherine's life the way Alexander had, sudden, overwhelming, and impossible to ignore. The journey from Whitmore House had taken 3 days, the roads muddy and rutted from early spring rains. Catherine sat in a well-appointed carriage sent by the Duke of Renford himself, accompanied by Mrs. Crowthorne, who had insisted on coming despite her loud protests that London is full of thieves, liars, and people who think too much of themselves. "You have just described every village in England," Catherine had replied. "Yes, but in London they wear better coats while doing it," Mrs. Crowthorne had retorted. Now, as the carriage rolled through streets that grew progressively wider, cleaner, and more imposing, Catherine felt the first real flutter of doubt settle in her chest. She had accepted Alexander's invitation after 2 weeks of agonizing deliberation. Her father had encouraged her with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "Go," he had said. "See what the world offers when it is not grinding you into dust. You have earned that much." But earning the right to visit and belonging in a world of dukes and duchesses were 2 entirely different things. The carriage turned onto a street lined with elegant townhouses, their facades gleaming white in the afternoon sun. Servants in livery stood at attention before polished doors. Ladies in gowns that cost more than Catherine's entire wardrobe stepped delicately over clean cobblestones, their maids trailing behind with parcels wrapped in ribbon. Catherine's breath caught. "Steady," Mrs. Crowthorne said, reading her tension with the ease of long familiarity. "You pulled a duke out of a ditch and kept him alive through fever. A few fancy houses will not frighten you." "The houses do not frighten me," Catherine said quietly. "The people inside them do." "Then be more frightening than they are," the housekeeper said simply. The carriage stopped before a townhouse that managed to be both understated and magnificent, tall windows framed by dark shutters, a door of polished oak flanked by lanterns of wrought iron, window boxes filled with early blooms that must have cost a gardener's monthly wage. A footman opened the carriage door. Catherine stepped out, her travelling dress suddenly feeling shabby despite being the finest she owned. She lifted her chin, refusing to let her uncertainty show. The front door opened before they reached it. Alexander stood in the doorway. He looked different here, not in appearance, though his clothes were finer and his posture perhaps a touch more formal, but in context. Here, he was not a wounded man in a borrowed robe. He was the Duke of Renford, master of this house and a dozen others, a man whose name carried weight in Parliament and power in every corner of England. But when his eyes met hers, the formality melted. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and his voice held the same warmth she remembered from the Blue Room. "Welcome." "Your Grace," she replied, dipping into a curtsy that felt both necessary and absurd, given that she had once wiped blood from his temple. His mouth quirked as if he shared the thought. "Please," he said, stepping aside. "Come in. Mrs. Crowthorne, I am delighted you agreed to accompany Miss Whitmore. I have been warned that London is not to be trusted." "You were warned correctly, Mrs." Crowthorne said, sweeping past him with the confidence of someone utterly unimpressed by titles. "Where is the kitchen? I will need to inspect it before Miss Catherine eats anything prepared by strangers." A flicker of amusement crossed Alexander's face. "Through the hall, down the stairs, first door on the left. My cook is named Mrs. Albright. Tell her I sent you. She will either adore you or declare war. I am not certain which." "Good," Mrs. Crowthorne said. "I prefer honesty to simpering." She disappeared into the house, leaving Catherine alone with Alexander in the elegant entryway. For a moment neither spoke. "You came," he said finally. "You invited me," she replied. It seemed rude to refuse. "You are many things, Catherine Whitmore," he said quietly, "but no one has ever accused you of being ruled by politeness." She smiled despite herself. "True. I came because I was curious." About London. About you, she said honestly. In your world. I wanted to see if the man I met in the Blue Room still existed here, or if he vanished the moment he crossed back into marble halls and titled circles. His gaze held hers, steady and unguarded. Ask me again in a week, he said, and tell me what you see. Before she could reply, a voice called from deeper in the house, bright, imperious, and unmistakably amused. Alexander, if you leave that poor girl standing in the hallway like a forgotten parcel, I will never forgive you. A woman appeared, sweeping into view with the kind of entrance that suggested she had practiced it extensively and enjoyed every second. She was perhaps 50, her dark hair streaked with silver, her gown a deep emerald that complemented her sharp, intelligent eyes. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her welcome anywhere. Lady Alderton, Alexander said, a note of fond exasperation in his voice. I might have known you would arrive before I had a chance to make proper introductions. Proper introductions are dull, Lady Alderton said, stopping in front of Catherine and studying her with unabashed curiosity. You must be the young woman who saved this stubborn man's life. I have been dying to meet you. Miss Catherine Whitmore, Alexander said. May I present Lady Alderton, one of my oldest friends and London's most relentless meddler. I prefer strategist, Lady Alderton said, extending her hand. And you, my dear, are far prettier than Alexander's letters suggested. He described you as formidable. He failed to mention lovely. Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. He described me in letters. Oh, extensively, Lady Alderton said, eyes twinkling. It was most unlike him. Alexander usually writes about grain tariffs and parliamentary votes. Imagine my shock when I received 3 pages detailing the wit and courage of a certain Miss Whitmore, who argued with him as though he were an ordinary man. He is an ordinary man, Catherine said before she could stop herself. With an extraordinary title. Lady Alderton laughed, delighted. Oh, I like her, Alexander. You may keep her. She is not a stray cat, Vivian, he said dryly. Pity, Lady Alderton replied. Cats are easier to manage. She linked her arm through Catherine's with the ease of long-established intimacy. Come, my dear. Let me show you to your rooms. You will need to rest before tonight. Tonight? Catherine echoed, glancing back at Alexander. A small dinner, he said. Just a few friends, nothing formal. When Alexander says nothing formal, he means fewer than 20 people, and only 3 courses, Lady Alderton confided. Do not let him deceive you. Catherine's stomach tightened, but she forced a smile. I look forward to it. As Lady Alderton guided her up a sweeping staircase, Catherine caught Alexander's gaze one more time. He mouthed 2 words, trust me. She wished she found that as reassuring as he intended. The room Lady Alderton led her to was larger than Catherine's entire bedchamber at home. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, draped in soft blue fabric, that matched the curtains framing tall windows overlooking a manicured garden. A writing desk sat near the window, stocked with crisp paper and pens. A wardrobe, already open, revealed several gowns that had certainly not come from Whitmore House. Alexander had those made for you, Lady Alderton said, following her gaze. He remembered your measurements from, well, I assume from when you were tending his wounds. Do not blush, dear. It is practical, not scandalous, mostly. Catherine turned to her, words tangling on her tongue. This is too much. It is barely enough, Lady Alderton corrected, settling gracefully into a chair. You are a guest in a duke's home. You will be seen at dinners, perhaps at a ball or 2 if Alexander has his way. You cannot do that in a travelling dress, however charming. I do not belong here, Catherine said quietly. Lady Alderton's expression softened. You belong wherever you choose to be, my dear. The question is whether you wish to be here. Catherine sank onto the edge of the bed. I do not know, she admitted. Part of me is terrified, part of me is curious, and part of me wonders if Alexander invited me out of obligation rather than genuine interest. Alexander does nothing out of obligation, Lady Alderton said firmly. Duty, yes. Honour, absolutely. But obligation, never. If he wanted you here only to discharge a debt, he would have sent money and a polite note. Instead, he sent a carriage, an invitation, and approximately 7 letters to me, fretting over whether you would actually come. Catherine's heart skipped. 7? At least, Lady Alderton said. Possibly more. I stopped counting after he asked for the third time whether I thought emerald or sapphire would suit your complexion better. Despite herself, Catherine smiled. He is smitten, Lady Alderton said bluntly. Inconveniently, awkwardly, and entirely against his better judgment, but smitten nonetheless. The question, Miss Whitmore, is whether you feel the same. Catherine looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. I pulled him out of a ditch, she said. I nursed him through fever. I argued with him about grain policies I barely understood. And somewhere in all of that I began to... She faltered. To care, Lady Alderton finished gently. Yes, Catherine whispered. But caring for a wounded man in my father's house is different from caring for a duke in London. Here, he has responsibilities, expectations, a world that does not include me. Then make it include you, Lady Alderton said. Not by changing who you are, but by refusing to apologize for it. You are not less than anyone in this city, Catherine. You are simply different, and different in the right hands is extraordinary. Catherine met her gaze, finding unexpected warmth there. Why are you helping me? Because Alexander deserves someone who sees him, not his title, Lady Alderton said, and because I have spent 30 years watching this city chew up genuine people and spit out polished shells. I would like just once to see it fail. The dinner that evening was exactly as Lady Alderton had predicted. 18 guests, 4 courses, and enough scrutiny to make Catherine feel like a specimen under glass. She wore one of the gowns Alexander had provided, a soft rose silk that fit perfectly and made her feel both beautiful and fraudulent. Mrs. Crowthorne had helped her dress, muttering the entire time about unnecessary frippery while secretly looking pleased. Now seated in Alexander's dining room beneath a chandelier that held more candles than Catherine had seen in her life, she tried to remember how to breathe. The guests were a mixture of lords, ladies, and wealthy commoners, politicians, merchants, a retired general, and 2 women whose sharp eyes missed nothing. Conversation flowed around her in currents she struggled to follow, debates about trade routes, speculation about the king's health, gossip about someone's daughter who had eloped with a French comte. Alexander sat at the head of the table, presiding with the ease of long practice. But his gaze found Catherine often, a silent reassurance each time. Across from her sat a man introduced as Lord Pembroke, tall, languid, with mischievous eyes, and a smile that suggested he found the entire world amusing. So, Miss Whitmore, he said, leaning forward conspiratorially, you are the famous rescuer. Alexander has spoken of little else since his return. I am certain that is an exaggeration, Catherine said. Oh, it absolutely is, Pembroke agreed cheerfully. He also speaks of tariffs and amendments and tedious parliamentary procedure, but you feature far more prominently than usual, which is saying something. Pembroke, Alexander said from the head of the table, his tone carrying a warning. I am being charming, Pembroke protested. Miss Whitmore appreciates charm, do you not? I appreciate honesty, Catherine said. Charm is negotiable. Pembroke blinked, then laughed. Oh, Alexander, she is perfect. Do not let her escape. I have no intention of letting her do anything, Alexander said. Miss Whitmore makes her own decisions. How refreshing, drawled a woman to Catherine's left, Lady Cassandra, a beauty with ice-blonde hair and a smile that did not reach her eyes. Most women in your position would be eager to please. Catherine met her gaze evenly. I have never found eagerness to please particularly useful, Lady Cassandra. It tends to make one agreeable rather than interesting. A beat of silence. Then Lady Alderton laughed, bright and approving. Well said, my dear. Lady Cassandra's smile thinned, but she said nothing more. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of courses and conversation. Catherine answered questions about Whitmore House, about the countryside, about her family. She deflected inquiries that felt too probing, and met condescension with calm refusal to be diminished. By the time dessert arrived, an elaborate confection of cream and berries, she felt exhausted and strangely exhilarated. When the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room, leaving the men to their port and cigars, Lady Alderton appeared at Catherine's side. You survived, she murmured. Barely, Catherine admitted. Nonsense, you were magnificent. Lady Cassandra has not been put in her place so neatly in years. She does not like me. She does not like anyone who threatens her position as the most desirable woman in Alexander's orbit, Lady Alderton said. She has been angling for a proposal from him for 3 years. Your presence is inconvenient. Catherine's chest tightened. Did he ever? No, Lady Alderton said firmly. He is unfailingly polite to her and utterly indifferent, which, of course, only makes her more determined. Before Catherine could respond, the men rejoined them. Alexander crossed the room directly to her side. "Walk with me?" he asked quietly. She nodded. He led her through glass doors onto a terrace overlooking the garden. The night air was cool, scented with early roses. Lanterns glowed softly among the paths. For a moment they simply stood in silence. "I'm sorry," Alexander said finally. She glanced at him. For what? For Lady Cassandra's barbs, for Pembroke's teasing, for thrusting you into a world where you are measured and judged before you have even finished your soup. "I can handle judgment," Catherine said. "I have been judged my entire life, for my family's debts, for my lack of dowry, for daring to have opinions. This is simply a different audience." He turned to face her fully. "You do not have to endure it. If you wish to leave, if this is too much, I will understand." "Do you want me to leave?" she asked. "No," he said immediately. "God, no. I want you to stay. But I will not keep you here if it makes you miserable." She studied his face in the lantern light, the face she had first seen pale and bloodied, now healed and handsome and filled with an uncertainty that made him achingly human. "I am not miserable," she said. "I am overwhelmed. There is a difference." "Then stay," he said softly. "Stay and let me show you that not all of this world is Lady Cassandra's cutting remarks and Pembroke's relentless charm. Some of it is—" He gestured toward the garden, the quiet night, the space between them. This, she echoed. "Honest conversation," he said. "No performance, no strategy, just two people who met in the worst possible circumstances and somehow found something worth preserving." Her breath caught. "And what is that something, Alexander?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the pulse in his throat, the way his hands flexed at his sides as if he wanted to reach for her but did not dare. "I do not have a word for it yet," he admitted. "But I feel it every time you argue with me, every time you refuse to be impressed by things that impress everyone else, every time you look at me as though I am simply a man who owes you a debt, not a duke who could change your circumstances." "You have changed my circumstances," she said. "You cleared my father's debts. You gave us back our land. That is not nothing." "It is payment," he said. "Not a gift. You saved my life, Catherine. I gave you back your security. We are even." "Then why am I here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I am greedy," he said. "I want more than even. I want to know what happens next. I want to hear you laugh at Pembroke's terrible jokes and watch you put Lady Cassandra in her place, with nothing but a well-timed sentence. I want to argue with you about things that do not matter, and agree with you about things that do. I want—" He stopped, searching for words. "I want you in my life, Catherine, not as an obligation, as a choice." Tears pricked her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "You are a duke," she said. "I am the daughter of a man who nearly lost everything. We do not belong in the same story." "We are already in the same story," he said. "It began in a ditch on a muddy road. The question is whether we write the next chapter together or apart." She looked at him, this man who had been a stranger, then a patient, then a puzzle, and now something far more complicated and terrifying. "I am afraid," she admitted. "So am I," he said. "But I have learned that the things worth having are usually the things that terrify us most." Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, he reached for her hand. She let him take it. His fingers curled around hers, warm and solid and real. "Stay," he said again. "Not forever. Not yet. Just long enough to see if what we have can survive outside the blue room." She nodded, not trusting her voice. He smiled then, soft and genuine, and for the first time since arriving in London, Catherine felt the tight knot in her chest begin to ease. Perhaps she did not belong here yet. But perhaps with time, she could. The next 3 weeks unfolded like a dream, or a test, Catherine could not decide which. Alexander introduced her to his world carefully, as though understanding that too much too fast would crush rather than dazzle. She attended small gatherings, walked in parks where fashionable society promenaded, visited museums and galleries where Alexander explained art with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting years for an audience who actually cared. She met his friends, Lord Pembroke, who flirted shamelessly and made her laugh despite herself, Lady Alderton, who became something like a mentor, and a handful of others who seemed genuinely intrigued by the woman who had saved the Duke of Renford's life. She also encountered his enemies, though they wore polite smiles and spoke in coded language. Men who resented his power, women who resented her presence. Whispers followed her through ballrooms. Who is she? Where did she come from? What does she want? Catherine learned to ignore them. What she could not ignore was the way Alexander looked at her when he thought she was not watching, as though she was something precious and fragile and entirely unexpected. One afternoon, as they walked through Hyde Park, he said, "You have been here 3 weeks. What do you think of London now?" She considered. "It is loud, crowded, expensive, full of people who care too much about appearances and not enough about substance." "And yet," he prompted. "And yet," she said, "it also has bookstores on every corner, theatres that perform Shakespeare properly, and a man who once nearly died in a ditch and somehow convinced me to give him a second chance." He smiled. "Only a second chance?" "Do not be greedy, Your Grace." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment. "Catherine," he said suddenly, stopping beneath the shade of an oak tree. "There is something I must ask you." Her heart thudded. "Yes?" "I am hosting a ball," he said. 2 weeks from now. It will be large, formal, and insufferably tedious in places. But it will also be the moment when I make clear to London society that you are not simply a guest in my home." "Then what am I?" she asked. He met her gaze steadily. "The woman I intend to court, properly, publicly, with every intention of asking her eventually to marry me." The world seemed to tilt. "Alexander," she breathed. "I know it is fast," he said quickly. "I know we have only known each other a handful of weeks. I know that you have every reason to doubt whether this is real or simply gratitude dressed up as affection. But Catherine, I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who want something from me. My title, my money, my influence. You are the only person who ever wanted nothing but to keep me alive. And somewhere between the Blue Room and this park, I realized that I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Tears spilled over before she could stop them. "You are crying," he said, stricken. "I have made you cry. I'm sorry, I'm crying because I'm happy, you idiot," she said, laughing through the tears, and terrified, and utterly overwhelmed. "Is that a yes?" he asked cautiously. "It is a maybe," she said. "Ask me after the ball. Let me see if I can survive being courted by a duke in front of all of London. If I can, then we will talk about the rest." He smiled, relief and hope mingling in his expression. "That is more than I dared hope for." "You are very easy to please," she said. "Only when it comes to you," he replied. The ball was everything Catherine had feared and more. The ballroom glittered with candlelight reflected in mirrors and crystal. Women in gowns worth more than Whitmore House swept across polished floors. Men in impeccable evening dress discussed politics and horses and investments, and Catherine stood at the top of the staircase in a gown of deep midnight blue, Alexander at her side, feeling as though she had stepped into a story that was not hers. "Ready?" he murmured. "No," she said honestly. "Good," he said. "Neither am I." They descended together. The whispers started immediately. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Catherine felt the weight of 100 gazes and forced herself to keep her chin high, her expression calm. Alexander led her to the center of the ballroom. The orchestra struck up a waltz. He bowed, she curtsied, and then they danced. Catherine had learned to dance as a girl, though she had rarely had occasion to use the skill. But Alexander led with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times, and she found herself following easily, their bodies moving in sync. "They are staring," she whispered. "Let them," he said. "They have never seen me dance with someone I actually care about." "And how many people have you danced with?" she asked. "Hundreds," he said. "None of them you." Her heart swelled. The waltz ended. Applause rippled through the room. And then, to her shock, other men approached asking for dances. Lord Pembroke claimed the next, spinning her across the floor with theatrical flair. "You are doing splendidly," he said. "Half the room is jealous. The other half is confused. Both are excellent outcomes." A retired general danced with her after that, asking thoughtful questions about Whitmore House and nodding approvingly at her answers. Even Lady Cassandra approached, though her smile was brittle. "You have done well for yourself, Miss Whitmore," she said. "I have done nothing but be honest," Catherine replied. "Everything else followed." Lady Cassandra's smile froze. How quaint. But by the end of the evening, as Catherine stood on the terrace once more with Alexander, the city glittering below them, she felt something shift. "I survived," she said. "You triumphed," he corrected. She turned to him. "Ask me." He blinked. "Ask you what?" "What you wanted to ask after the ball," she said. "Ask me now." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Catherine Whitmore," he said softly, taking both her hands in his. "Will you allow me to court you? Will you give me the chance to prove that what I feel is not gratitude or obligation, but something real and lasting and entirely inconvenient?" She smiled through fresh tears. "Yes." He exhaled, relief and joy flooding his features. "Yes?" "Yes," she said again. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "I will not become someone I am not," she said. "I will not simper or pretend or apologize for caring about things that matter. If you want me, Alexander, you get all of me. The arguments, the stubbornness, the refusal to be impressed by titles. I would not have you any other way," he said. "And," she continued, "if we do this, if we truly do this, you must promise me that you will see me, not the woman who saved you, not the novelty, me. I have only ever seen you, Catherine," he said quietly. "From the moment I woke in that blue room and you told me not to dare die there, you have been the clearest thing in my life ever since." She kissed him then, rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his with all the emotion she had been holding back for weeks. He froze for half a heartbeat, then kissed her back, his hands coming up to frame her face, his touch reverent and sure. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and smiling, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. She laughed. "You said you would court me first." "I am impatient," he said. "I told you that." "Then be patient," she said. "Court me. Let me grow accustomed to this world, and when the time is right, ask me again." "And will you say yes?" he asked. She smiled. "Ask me and find out." 6 months later, in a quiet chapel on Renford land, Catherine Whitmore became Catherine Cavendish, Duchess of Renford. Her father walked her down the aisle, tears streaming down his face. Mrs. Crowthorne sat in the front row, sniffling loudly and declaring it the most ridiculous and wonderful thing she had ever witnessed. Lady Alderton attended with a satisfied smile, as if she had orchestrated the entire affair herself, and Alexander stood at the altar, looking at Catherine as though she were the only person in the world. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too," she whispered back, "even though you are still a terrible patient." He laughed, bright and free, and she realized that the man she had pulled from a ditch had become the man she would spend her life beside. Not because of duty, not because of debt, but because somewhere between a muddy road and a midnight blue gown they had chosen each other. And that, Catherine thought as Alexander took her hand and led her back down the aisle to applause and cheers, was the truest kind of love there was. The end. Dear listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this journey from a chance encounter on a muddy road to a love that defied every expectation. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, leave a comment telling us your favorite moment, hit that like button, and activate notifications so you never miss another tale of courage, romance, and second chances. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, may you always have the courage to stop for strangers in ditches. You never know what extraordinary story might follow.